seconds. So let's formally welcome everybody. If you've joined us, you have found the right place. As the screen will show you, we are having a workshop today for just 1 hour. We want to really respect everybody's time, and I've asked those people who are participating to keep their 5 or 6 minutes allotted tight, because what we really want to do is also have a number of questions and interactions from our virtual audience, of which there are over 108 delegates who've joined us. We've got people from Belfast, we've got people from Amsterdam, we've got people from Aberdeen, we've got people from Birmingham, and of course there's a good list of people like Transport for London, and a number of companies and architects and design companies from London. So welcome everybody. What I would suggest we do first of all is just ask Daniel, Andrew, Angela and David to introduce themselves, because they're the ones who are going to speak today. So let's start with Daniel. Daniel, would you like just to say who you are, what you're from, and also your area of expertise today?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Partridge. I'm Head of Ventures and Strategy at PRD. Our expertise is around designing and mobilising strategies for the built environment, inclusive economy, and we work very much around the local authority-driven agenda, but across sectors. And I guess today I'm really looking forward to getting some different viewpoints from parties across different parts of the market and different parts of Europe.
Great. Daniel, I know that you work quite closely with Andrew, who runs a fantastic project in Brixton in South London. And actually, Andrew is joining us today from Australia, where I suspect he's setting up another satellite centre. Who knows? Andrew, over to you. Who are you and what are you going to share today?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Andrew Cribb, CEO of 3Space. We're a non-profit affordable workspace operator. We work with the private sector and public sector in over 45 buildings across the UK for the last 11 years. I'm also founder of Redo, which is an advisory company which helps predominantly local authorities to use their property assets to deliver affordable space. From our work, we see benefits from using existing buildings over new buildings to deliver low-cost space. And today I'm really looking forward to sharing examples of this, but also discussing and learning about other options to do this.
Great, well done, Andrew. I'm just putting something in the chat, just encouraging all panelists, but also all of those who are contributing to use the chat. So Andrew, put the website address of the International House Project in the chat. Daniel, the same for you. Do share your PRD Solutions website and all the work that you're doing so that people can look in on your project. Let's go to Angela. Angela, lovely to have you here. Just share an introduction about yourself and your work.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephen. My name's Angela Brennan. I'm a Senior Development Manager at Lendlease. I'm working specifically out at Elephant and Castle at our Elephant Park regeneration scheme there. And have been working with Andrew over a period of time over the last probably 18 months in terms of affordable workspace and what that starts to look like. And I think today my real area of interest is really, I think, in the title of the session and really how we look at affordable workspace as a solution and not a problem. And I think as the whole concept of affordable workspace has started to evolve and, you know, it's obviously still in its infancy, how do we really look at it as an opportunity to really drive successful mixed use development that anchors development in the communities within which they're based, in terms of how we really then use that to drive the sustainable long-term success of workspace community and what that means, especially in a post-pandemic world.
Angela, thank you so much. I mean, you're right, this is an emerging area, isn't it? And it's fantastic that Claire has today brought together practitioners like Andrew, who are social entrepreneurs, people like Daniel, who've done a lot of work in policy, people like David, who's done some work in the innovation space, and yourself as a developer. So thank you so much, but really look forward to hearing from your experience later today. And last but not least, David Crichton Miller is very heavily involved in developing an amazing project called the Oxford Innovation Lab. I think it's a lab. Let's ask David to introduce himself.
Stephen, thanks very much indeed. I'm David Crichton Miller. I'm a director of Oxford Innovation. Actually, Steve, we've been around for over 30 years and we manage over 25 innovation and enterprise hubs up and down the country, from Belfast to Bristol to Manchester to London. These are innovation and enterprise hubs for startups, small businesses, innovators. About half of them are affordable workspaces. There are 1,200 small businesses and social enterprises in them. So this is sort of what we do for a living. It's kind of innovation-driven, enterprise-driven, local economic development, and trying to help make places work by drawing in the community by curating a community of enterprising small businesses that actually drive economic vitality. So what I guess we're really interested in is understanding, and helping everybody to understand what affordable workspaces, what's required for affordable workspaces to come on stream, what small businesses and enterprises are looking for in order to be gatherable in a part of the country they might not otherwise be seeking to gather in, and the contribution they can make to those developments Angela was talking about, because I believe these hubs can drive up the value for developers of the places that are being developed. So that's my bit.
Wonderful. Well, David, thank you so much. You used this lovely word, curate. In a moment, Claire's going to give us 3 C's that she's picked up from her report. But we are all curators. We're making spaces alive. We're making spaces available for the community. Just before I hand over to Claire, just a little introduction to myself. My name is Steve Carrick Davis. I have the opportunity to run an affordable workspace here in South London. One of the things that we've been really sensitive about is that there are people on this call from different parts of the country, but we mustn't be London-centric. Some of the examples that Claire's used have been in London, but also in Telford and elsewhere in the country. So if you're ringing in today from Belfast or Aberdeen, we know that some of the issues we're talking about today are peculiar to a city space, but we know that there's a huge opportunity to create affordable workspaces in rural areas and in the burgeoning communities around a city centre. Some of you may have seen that the Irish government have just invested or supported 400 rural pubs across Ireland, because they see those as assets that need to be kept for the community and trying to transition and pivot from just alcohol to a workspace. So lots we can learn from all around the country, and indeed, Andrew, with you in Australia, all around the world. So without further ado, let's pass on to Claire. Claire is the author of this report, which if you've just joined us and didn't hear earlier, we will be sending you today. It's been launched today. We're very grateful to the BCO who have supported the development of this report, and it'll be on their website shortly. Claire is the director in Savills commercial research team. So she's really been in this industry in terms of the kind of the property and the building space for many, many years. And Claire, we are delighted to ask you to present your report today. So 5 minutes on a kind of overview of what the report says, and then we'll pick up with questions and different panelists speaking. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Stephen. I feel a bit of a fraud, actually. There's so many amazing speakers today, and without them, I couldn't have actually written this report. So thank you all so much for the collaboration in writing this. Affordable workspaces, a solution and not a problem. And I feel like it's a really positive thing that I've written. And loads hopefully will come out of it. Just a bit of background on me. As Stephen said, I'm a director in the commercial research department at Savills. I've been there for just over 15 years. So I've seen a lot of changes within the commercial spaces. I predominantly look at regional offices and the trends within regional offices, but before that I was looking at trends within the city office market, so I'm well versed in the office market. But what really excites me at the moment, and what made me want to get involved in this project, was ESG. I'm doing a lot on the E of ESG and the environmental, but what I really have a passion for is the S of ESG, the social sustainability, and I think it feeds through this report very nicely. I'm also involved in something called the Loneliness Lab in conjunction with Lendlease, looking at how you can design out loneliness within the urban environment, and that comes under the umbrella of the 3 C's that I'm going to talk about. That's all: collaboration and culture and community. Next slide, please. And I think for me, this just sums up really what the report really means to me. And affordable workspace, it has a critical role to play. And I think coming out of the pandemic, it's even more important to think about the wider picture and to think about the community, our local communities. We're getting the rents within London particularly are becoming too high for these local businesses, for local people to actually get a rung on the ladder. So we've got to think about this, and it doesn't have to be a negative. And I think that's why I called the report what I did. There's the perception can be very much that affordable workspace is something which is negative. It's an afterthought. It's like, how do we sort of put this into our development, oh, it's a bit of a problem, but actually there's so much opportunity that can come out of this, both from sort of a societal point of view and also from the bottom line when it comes to developments. Next slide, please. So for me, the 3 C's, this is really sort of what I'm going to bang on about. It's all about community, it's all about culture, and it's all about collaboration. And this comes through when I talk about the sort of traditional office market as well. If we want to build back better, we want to get people back into cities, then we have to think about the bigger picture. We have to think about the community and the culture that we're getting, and the collaboration. And I think for affordable workspaces, the collaboration between the local boroughs, the developers and the local businesses as well. They've got to all work together. So it's not a sort of them and us mentality going forward. Next slide, please. What has been very apparent during my research over the last few weeks is the affordability gap. And I think that's where there's been a real barrier going forward, and the sort of developer rent expectation for the affordable workspace, it just doesn't tally up with the level that a social operator can afford, and I think Andrew will go into more detail on that going forward. But there are alternatives. Next slide, please. And we've seen some really sort of interesting ways of getting around this. And I know that the international house model is a great one, again, which Andrew will go into more detail about. And it's not just about a space, it's not just about the building, but it's about the business support, it's about the mentoring, the apprenticeships. It's about helping these local people, going back to grassroots really. And also the value of mixed use. If you look on the photo on the left, that's the Telford Homes, the Stone Studios, where the Creative Land Trust has acquired Stone Studios. It's actually 180 studios, and it's really given vitality and life to this part of Hackney Wick, but it's also kept the grassroots feel to Hackney Wick, that sort of artist creative community. And from a monetary perspective, there's been 11% uplift in values there. So it's a win-win really. And the picture below that is of the depot in Shoreditch, another sort of creative way to keep the community alive, where a business has opened its doors to the community and it's shared its office space with the local community. It's particularly expensive around Old Street now and Shoreditch. So doing this enables sort of young entrepreneurs to actually have a space to work in their local area. And on that note, I don't want to take up too much of your time. We've got some great speakers today, so I will pass back to Stephen.
Claire, thank you so much. And if you've just joined us and you were running a bit late to this webinar, let me just say a couple of bits of housekeeping. So the report that Claire references and mentions, which is called Affordable Workspace, a Solution, Not a Problem, will be circulated to all attendees after the call today. And I really encourage you not only to read it, but to circulate it. One of the big call outs, as Claire's just said, is this need for collaboration. And in the report, she says that local authorities particularly have an opportunity to step up and act as catalysts for change. When I looked through the delegation list today, there's over 108 of us on this call. There's very few people from the local authorities. So if you have a partnership with a local authority, this is the opportunity to say, look, this is a grassroots swell movement where people who are practitioners are really saying this is a solution, not a problem. So do circulate the report as you can. So the last bit of housekeeping, just to say, we are recording this session today. So we will circulate both the report and the recording. And again, you can circulate that as well. If you didn't want to be recorded, now's the time to leave. Let's move on to Daniel. Daniel Partridge, as you know, in his introduction, runs something called PRD. And he's got so much to share on this issue. For many years, has been involved in both the strategic policy side of workspaces and commercial development as a whole, but also, as you'll hear, with his work with Andrew International House, been developing some really important social value and social impact work. Daniel, over to you. Have 5 or 6 minutes to share from your experience and your background.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Claire, for the presentation and brilliant report. It's really good to see a mixture of viewpoints and evidence and ideas come together. And certainly over the last few years, we've worked quite closely with Andrew and his colleague Harry, supporting a range of clients around the country to look at how they can bring workspace forward. There's always a local authority driver in the types of projects that we're looking at for workspace, but it's very much about bringing parties across different sectors together for better solutions. And for me, I think there's been quite a lot of challenge for local authorities, because one of the main areas for them to affect affordable workspace delivery is through the sort of Section 106 affordable workspace policies. And you'll see from Claire's review in her report that there's a real mixed bag of levels of sophistication and definition within those policies around the country. And that can mean that it doesn't really give a clear steer to the market in terms of what is expected. But also, I think the biggest issue is that affordable itself, like affordable housing, is quite a loaded and specific term that needs to be thought about in the context of the end outcomes that you're looking to achieve, really. And that really is quite a big area of market failure. So quite often you'll find that, you know, developers will work hard with local authorities to satisfy their 106 obligations, but the end product that is being offered to the market isn't able to really meet the needs of that market. And there's some key market failures there. So some of those might be new buildings will have quite high service charges and high levels of affordability. You know, an affordable Ferrari is still a Ferrari, and an affordable Morris Minor is a Morris Minor. There are different markets for each. So new buildings and new office space isn't necessarily the right type of provision for startups, people looking to try new businesses. But also it's about the types of terms and pricing and flexibility that can be passed on to those end users. And that can't always be satisfied, again, you know, without the intervention of the right types of intermediaries like Three Space. So that those are quite important ones. So what can local authorities do about that? Well, I think there's a raft of activities that can be put into play around the obligations. So for example, there's need for better visibility of the different intermediaries, different approaches in terms of how those parties work with local authorities, and Andrew will tell you a bit about International House, where the parties work together and make a more of an organic business plan type approach that's relevant to that area, but also leaving some opportunities for some of that economic value to be reinvested back through those models, cross-subsidy, and really making sure that the parts of the community that should be targeted are able to access the resources and things they need. I think the other opportunity to act, and again, you'll see some really interesting examples in the report, like for example, in Sutton or Peterborough we're working with at the moment, is where local authorities, through use of their own assets or through direct acquisition, take control of assets that are suitable for workspace and make better use of some of these unpolished gems that are already within our communities. I think by doing that, they need to be really bold at looking at things like best value and recognising the wider set of drivers and outcomes for local areas that matter to best value, and say, actually, we can address the affordability gap here. We can find a way to bridge that. Looking back at Claire's chart, that's spot on. If you don't address that gap and find a way to mitigate that, then you're not going to get the end users benefiting from the services that you want, and you won't enjoy all the benefits of that dynamism and vibrancy. So I think there's a raft of things that are big problems, but the good news is there's some real innovation happening right across the country, from long-term players like David and Andrew to much more new localized solutions that are popping up. So it's a really exciting time, to be honest.
Daniel, thank you so much. Can't we all see the wealth of experience and knowledge that Daniel has? And I love a couple of phrases that you talked about, unpolished gems. I know that Claire has also done a blog looking at the way that people relate to spaces of historical interest. And obviously the environmental issue of building new spaces and new, obviously, workspaces. We need to balance that with the opportunities, as you talk about, unpolished gems for local authorities to repurpose existing assets and bring them back into community use. I know there's a couple of questions that will come from other panelists later on, but one question for me is this cross-subsidy reference you made. You know, I think it's so great to think about companies and obviously local authorities having affordable workspace policies, but who is policing those? Who is ensuring that they really are what they say they are? Is there any type of body that would be appropriate to look at this kind of checking and balancing that affordable workspaces actually exist?
I think that's a really, really good question. And you can see in recent years, parties like the GLA have attempted this by bringing out an accreditation for workspace buildings being affordable. But we think that could go a step further, and there's a real opportunity to accredit a series of operators. And I think that's part of the interesting market making. So some boroughs have started to make lists of affordable operators that they know and trust, and they can matchmake those with opportunities. But equally, it's about the quality of the service level agreement and the lease that you put in place. So an outcomes-based lease that sets out a set of measures that can be cascaded through to how the end users are targeted, how they're priced, how they're allocated, and the different obligations upon them in terms of how they work with the local community and the types of things that matter to the council need to be structured in that arrangement. And I'm not going to steal Andrew's thunder too much, because I know this is a real key feature of International House, and certainly one of the things we think is most important to celebrate about that project. But you can also tie that back to different social impact and public value measures, so you can start to make an evidenced and validated case for what those measures mean in terms of the local authorities' objectives and the objectives for communities.
Daniel, thank you so much. That's a really important point you bring up. Could you in the chat put the GLA accreditation workspace program? I know it's in its infancy and they're still looking, I think, at some consultation around what should be in there. There is obviously some important quality marks and quality service agreements that you'd expect from a reputable local authority, a reputable affordable housing, I'm mixing my messages here, affordable workspace providers. But it would be good to see that, and also for other people to contribute. Well, that's a lovely segue then into Andrew. Andrew, it's 8 o'clock in the evening over in Australia, so we're grateful that you have not stayed up, but you're still working at this time of the day. Andrew, 5 or 6 minutes, share with us both the points that Daniel was talking about the relationship you have and the collaboration with local authorities, but also some of the experiences you've had developing International House in Brixton.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So over the last 11 years at ThreeSpace, we've been working on finding different operating solutions for providing more affordable space in cities. And the one we settled on is a cross-subsidy model. And we call this buy, give, work, which loosely means for every space that's paid for, one is given away to support social and inclusive growth objectives, be it youth enterprise, creativity, charity, community, or culture. The best way to explain how this works, and it's already been referenced, is the example of International House, which is our project in Brixton. This is a 65,000 square foot former council office, spread over 12 floors, and it was built in the 70s. 5 floors of the space are what we call buy, or for paying tenants. And it's made up of startups and scale-ups. Many are tech businesses. Our biggest tenant, to give you an idea, has over 100 employees, and they grew from 30 staff in less than 2 years. On the give side, or rent-free tenants, they're spread over another 5 floors or 20,000 square feet. This includes a floor for youth entrepreneurship. Then there's a floor called the fabric floor, which is sewing machines and making equipment, and is focused on fashion and textiles. While the photography floor provides a home for the 30-year-old non-profit Photo Fusion, which was at risk of being priced out and lost from the borough altogether. And another floor provides a home for 60 local charities and social enterprises to work and collaborate. There is also a free-to-use ground floor event space. Now, the choice of these give tenants are curated by us and matched to the strategic objectives of the landlord, in this case, the council, they are the landlord, and they had a desire to shift Brixton predominantly retail economy towards creative industries and tech, but as well as supporting local people and community initiatives at the same time. So each buy tenant is required to provide an hour of their time each month to support a give tenant. So there is lots of support and collaboration between the two groups, the buy and the give. And this is in itself an experience and attraction for a paying tenant. Linking to Dan's points earlier, this approach also creates a lot of public value for the council as landlord and for society. But also from a city making and sustainability point of view, it's also, we would argue, the building's best use. To highlight some of the value it creates, 1.1 million is paid in rent to the council over 5 years. It's a full repairing lease, so all maintenance, operation costs and risks sit with ThreeSpace, keeping in mind this is a 70s built building. The building was repurposed with a 100K starting budget from ThreeSpace, which then leveraged a further 800K fit out in the first year from tenants and partners. So this model is not reliant on large amount of upfront capital investment and a genuine alternative to the commonly used top-down economic development model. But one of the key differences from more traditional development is the scale of the civil society, social and creative uses. It was found in a recent report that the building provides £413 per square metre of social value, which, to give you an idea, is 15 times that of a traditional office development. This type of use is unlike a market-led product, and its uses aren't compatible with a new build corporate HQ, nor indeed would it be able to cover the operating costs, as Claire's already mentioned, of a new build. Yet we see this as a viable solution for cities and local authorities. Buildings such as International House are in the right place and offer an alternative, but also a cost-effective model to develop London, especially when considering the longer-term environmental, social, and economic benefits. Our next step, and it's already been mentioned, is to spread this cross-subsidy model more in a linear fashion, more widely with a pool of assets, reaching economies of scale where larger buildings can support smaller, harder to operate spaces.
Caught me looking at the chat. So sorry, Andrew. Well, listen, that's a great presentation. And in the report that Claire has written, there is a box and a whole case study of what you're doing at International House and this model that you've developed. I suppose the one question I'd have before I come to a couple of questions from the chat was, isn't there implied in this a scale issue that, you know, if you've got a whole floor that subsidizes another floor, you've obviously got to have a fairly large space. What would you say was the sort of optimum size for this kind of cross-subsidy model? Is it related to size, or is it something that you could do in a small space?
Yeah, that's a great question. It very much is related to size. And we're exploring now trying to establish one in every quadrant of London. And we've sort of worked out roughly 35,000 square feet from that perspective is what we need to do. But we believe if we can do that, we can unlock the smaller spaces, which are particularly coming forward, we see as part of a lot of the affordable workspace policy that's being delivered around the sort of 4,000, 5,000 square feet, which are really hard for an operator to make work on an affordable basis. So I think from a linear approach, there's an opportunity for multiple smaller spaces, but to do this particular model, it does need a larger and above that sort of 35,000 square feet space.
Very helpful reflection. And I think David will also later on share some of the experience he's had of not just having a one large space, but as he said in his introduction, 25 or 30 different spaces. And there's a way that we can use technology or an app, which means that you could book at different spaces and aggregate the space so there's more choice, not just based on a locality. We've got a comment and a question here from Robert, who says, you know, those £2 per square foot rates are way too high for us outside of London, even for A-grade offices. This was probably an earlier post that he put when Claire was sharing her model. But let's just recognise this question also linked to Erland Rendell's point, which is what does affordable mean and what criteria applied to measure this? So let's, instead of going forward a second, just go back and say, well, what do we talk about affordability? And is there a London-centric market here that dictates rents and rates? And what can we do about that? Maybe you could start, but then I know that Daniel may have some views on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good point. The definition is very difficult to solve, particularly when you're thinking in a planning context, which loves a rigid response. Whereas I think what Claire's report shows and what Dan mentioned is there's lots of different solutions really, and there's lots of different needs from lots of different groups. For us, from our particular our startups and scale ups, they're really important for the ecosystem, as are the non-profits. Who need support, possibly longer, rent-free for longer, and for maybe even forever. So, but they deliver amazing social value outputs. So I think there's not necessarily a catch-all, but from the solutions we think work better are trying to solve the challenge by taking on buildings where their assets owned by the local authority or them purchasing buildings and development contributions, rather than, I guess, trying to fit it within this rigid system, which is harder to do from a definition point of view. Yeah,
well, really helpful. And obviously Claire's report does tackle this issue about what do we mean by affordability and affordability to who. And it's also not just about affordability, it's about quality and flexibility. If you have something affordable and it's cheap and it's no good, everyone's going to go. So there's a sort of section aspect to this. Daniel, did you have any other comments to make about those two questions?
I fully agree. Affordable is a very woolly term, and we've seen that across workspace, housing, all elements of policy where it's used, and it's very challenging. I think it's about understanding what really is possible in the local area in terms of pricing, and recognizing that development might not be the way to satisfy that in certain areas. So as Andrew said, a better use of buildings that are already there, and certainly where there's a public sector interest in those buildings, either through its existing portfolio or taking an interest. And you'll see councils around the country using things like levelling up funding, towns funding, etc., to start to make those key strategic acquisitions, and recognising that the price has to be brought to the right level, otherwise it's not going to happen. Another opportunity could be for larger assets, similar to the buy-give kind of thinking, to co-locate a mixture of things together. So potentially if there are education or public sector tenants that can take up some of the heavy lifting on the operational cost of the building, making more and better use of the other spaces and flexible spaces, will be quite an interesting way to go. And just on that vein, I think you're seeing a lot of local authorities around the country recognise that the post-COVID office environment will be really different. You've probably got employees wanting to come back maybe 2 or 3 days a week, so you've got 40 to 60% capacity on top of what they might have been before, but recognising a different set of work settings. And so there might actually be opportunities to use buildings that are already in sort of office configurations differently, and just think about that underused capacity in a more interesting way.
Daniel, that's great. Thank you for those comments. You mentioned the Towns Fund. We also do need to recognise that this sort of central funding, which was replacing European social funding, things like the Prosperity Fund, the Levelling Up Fund, the Towns Fund, are at different stages making primarily 95% capital funding available. So we can sort of begin to also catalogue those funding sources that may help cross-subsidy. You talk about the imagination of developers, and that's a lovely segue into Angela, who, as I said beforehand, is senior within Lend-Lease. She's developing a huge project in my neighbourhood, just down the Old Kent Road at the Elephant Castle, and it's phenomenal, Angela. I've just watched that over the last 3 years go up. Share with us a little bit about not just the development at Elephant Castle, but what would Lend-Lease's vision be for nestling within developments, this affordable workspace? We've heard about affordable housing, but how can you really take a leadership role on this affordable workspace agenda?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I think the whole conversation, I think, is really timely at the moment. I think we're heading towards the, infamous Freedom Day and what that means, and what does life look like post-pandemic, which I think we're all really grappling with. But I think even more so that that kind of cements the importance of schemes like Elephant Park within Elephant and Castle, where we're really working towards that mixed-use community, where I think most people are probably aware it's a residential led master plan with a lot of supplementary retail as well, a huge new park that forms part of that broader public benefit that Elephant Park has been designed to do. But actually what's been really exciting for us is, as the master plan has evolved, we've recently submitted an application for a office building to finish off Elephant Park. And I think that's where that real mixed use starts to come to the fore, in terms of creating these communities, which we've all been so immersed in through the pandemic. And I think we've probably all, created stronger connections with our local community as well, in terms of what it means to be at home and what's around us. And we're hearing concepts, the 15-minute city that's coming out, where there's this broader concept about people wanting to be anchored in their community. They want their connections. They want to feel a part of it, and they want that authenticity. And I think that's where the real opportunity comes then, from an affordable workspace perspective, to Andrew's point with International House, in terms of how do we curate, how do we create these communities, and to Claire's point around these 3 C's that really focus on that collaboration, that really focus on the culture and the relevance of where you're located, in terms of what the right affordable workspace offering actually is, and how do you really use affordable workspace and that opportunity to enhance the community which then starts to extend that broader benefit in terms of what does it mean for your more traditional, larger organization, whereby they get that opportunity to be a part of something that can be quite granular but quite powerful, and how does that differentiate that place and the contribution to the broader placemaking and essence and ongoing establishment of the community. And I think to Dan's point in terms of the importance of the local authority as far as flexibility goes, what we need to see from them. I mean, Elephant Park has been ongoing now for 10 years or so, and we've got a really strong working relationship with Southwark Council. And to that point around with International House, having that shared vision in terms of what you want from that place, and therefore how that starts to transcend through to what does it mean for your retail, what does it mean for your place creation, what does it mean for your operators, and how does that start to work from an affordable workspace perspective, I think is really clear and really critical. And that's what we've seen at Elephant Park. Using affordable retail as an example, we have a Section 106 obligation that requires a proportion of our retail to be affordable retail. So through the evolution of the master plan and the implementation of meanwhile use, we had the artworks, which provided low-cost business space to food and beverage retailers, to architects, to small businesses and the like. And as the master plan has come forward, we've now been able to move 5 of those businesses into permanent space within Elephant Park, within our retail units. And of the 16 retailers that we've opened to date, 8 of them have opened on affordable rents. And so I think you start to see this, really from the beginning, how do you start to build that community, establish, and how you start to grow that support as well, starts to also give you that longevity, that continuity, and really keeps people grounded in their community, which I think is quite key. And I think probably the only other point as well, which I think is really goes to show how important that relationship is with the local authority as well, is working with Southwark around what is that, back to that definition of what is affordable, and again, using the affordable retail as an example. What we've come to find is that not all retailers need necessarily affordable retails and need affordable discounts as such on their rents as such. Some of them actually may need that help in terms of fit out cost instead, or it's the business support side of it. So I think to that, the earlier point around what is affordable, it's a woolly word, it's probably quite a contentious word, it's quite an emotive word, I think, when it's used in this broader context. And I think this is the opportunity that we've really got, is to look at what does affordability mean very much on an individual basis, and how do we as developers, local authorities, providers, occupiers, how do we all come to the table with a degree of flexibility and an open mind to find the solution that's going to work for all.
Angela, you've shared so much there. I was just making notes as you were talking about placemaking, about meanwhile use, about footfall, and looking at anchor tenants and things. There's a lot of what you've said in this mixed use from a development perspective. Have you got any experience of thinking of how you can have mixed income sources in an affordable workspace? The reason I ask that is that in the old days, when a company was putting together a shopping centre, they'd be people talk about anchor tenants. You have Debenhams and John Lewis and Marks and Spencers, all of whom from this pandemic are probably not anchor tenants anymore. Yeah. But would you see in your development at Lend-Lease in Elephant Castle, if you create this office, are you really being proactive at saying it's only going to be sustainable? We've got this mixed use ethos, but we have to have mixed use of that individual space, because I think sustainability is going to be absolutely crucial for organisations to get excited about having a space. And then obviously we don't know how pandemic is going to fit out. Might have another October close, and things are going to be tough. So just talk to us a little bit about sustainability, if you would.
Yeah, sure. I'm hopefully a bit more optimistic and hoping we're not going to have another close come October. So let's all think positively, and hopefully we'll kind of all get through this and come out the other side. Look, I think sustainability is key, and I think to Andrew and Dan's point around where is the right space and the right place for affordable workspace? Is it in new builds where that comes with opportunity? It also comes with challenges. And I think a lot of that is going to be very much a key focus in terms of how we how we evolve and how we make sure new buildings are relevant, because I think there is always going to need to be that mix. And there's that opportunity in terms of the more we can diversify and create that community and that self-sustaining community within a space, for example, on a floor, but importantly vertically within the building. I think that's where the value really starts to come from. And I think that opportunity that's presented through, affordable workspace occupiers having that probably a much greater degree of agility than what a large corporate does in terms of innovation and flexibility and talent, and just that speed and that different way of thought, I think really starts to curate then quite an interesting ecosystem within the broader building. I think in terms of, the cost side of things and the sustainability side of things, I think it really is going to come down to what's right for that area, for that space, who is the target market. And I think that's where it really comes back to being very clear in terms of who are we actually targeting. To the International House example, very, very clear focus on how that space wants to be curated, how that anchors in the community and how that's relevant to that local community. Again, just starts to really pull the roots down and keep it quite anchored, and the place anchored in its homeland, in its heart as such. And I think that's where we're all going to have flex, and I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to what that looks like.
Brilliant, Angela, some fantastic reflections there. And I really want to just say before we move on to David, is Andrew or Daniel, do you have, or even Claire, do you have any other reflections, particularly on this issue that Angela's talking about, sustainability? And also, you talk about the local, and our experience is the uber local. People are really, as you say, the 15-minute city in Paris is one model. I'd almost say 5-minute city is great because, people want to walk and the environmental issues are important. Daniel, Andrew, David, Claire, any reflections on what Angela's talking there in terms of about how do you sustain an affordable workspace?
I'd say, just from my point of view, I'd say coming out of the pandemic, these kind of areas are in a much better position with local areas than they were 2 years ago. What Angela was saying, people want to be more local now. So something like International House or the levels in Peckham, which I use as an example in the report, it's very much sort of fringe locations around London as an example, but people want to be in those areas now. They're local, and I think they'll get used much more. And just on the point of sort of vertical up the building, I've been talking about traditional offices in that sense over the last sort of 12 months, and a lot of developers now wanting to put a flexible office floor in to give it vitality within the building. And I think the same goes for sort of the International House model. It's, it brings vitality, having the differences on the floors, it brings vitality to the building and to the area.
I would say, yeah, I totally support that. And I would say in order to nurture sustainability, it's about a reasonable and fair risk transfer to your operator as well. So quite often you get lots of ambitions around meanwhile uses, which are fantastic, but realistically, what we need to see is a longer term commitment to affordability in these settings. And that will give operators the ability to make longer term plans and set down deep roots and maybe take a bit more risk on finance and things like that than they might otherwise do. I think if these arrangements are sort of truncated to sort of 7 years and below, it can be quite difficult for operators to really get established, and you're not going to get that sustainable ecosystem.
Daniel, that's an incredible point about fair risk transfer. I think you're right that a lot of the emerging pictures are all very bright and very positive, and it's great opportunities. But obviously, when we talk about buildings and projects, there is a real risk involved, and we are in unsettled times. So we're not by any chance today saying that it's all sailing, it's all easy. We're saying that this is an opportunity, but as we've seen from the discussions today, there are some really important principles to get right. So thank you for that. Well, look, we're halfway through, which is great because the timing is good, and we're going to now ask David Crichton Miller to share from his experience of developing the Oxford Innovation Labs. Obviously, any type of affordable workspace needs to look at particularly who's going to use it. And I think I'm right in thinking that, David, you've been looking more about the innovation and the IT sectors, but not exclusively. So over to you, 5 or 6 minutes. Share with us from your experience under this broad theme.
Okay, Stephen, thank you very much. And Claire, many congratulations on a really helpful report. By the way, lovely being on a panel with all of you because you're all extremely knowledgeable and thoughtful about this area. And obviously, one of the things we've heard is about the challenge of getting something affordable going that is financially and economically sensible for the parties involved. And I think what I want to talk a little bit about is trying to move away from this concept needing to be grounded in the ideas of subsidy, and certainly of subsidy on an ongoing basis. That's the point about sustainability Daniel was making. If you keep needing to fund affordable workspaces, it's much more of a challenge for a local authority than if it is financially sustainable in itself. So I want to talk a little bit about, sort of the kind of environments that are commercially viable in their own right, which, we operate, affordable workspaces for small businesses, and I believe they make, an economic contribution that is recognizable and visible in its own right. So first of all, let me just say something about what does a sort of a hub of enterprise look and feel like if it's going to make, be sustainable. I mean, what are these small businesses looking for in these hubs? And the answer is they're looking for, community. So lots of other businesses like them. There is an enormous network effect. If there are 10 of you, it's not very valuable. If there's 80 of you, it's really valuable. You get a lot of additional value from one another, from learning from each other. It becomes a more valuable place to be. So scale becomes really important because it underpins the ability for that network effect to be really valuable, and probably to underpin the provision of the kind of business support, animation activities that will make the place itself a destination and a hub. We provide innovation directors on site in almost all of our hubs. Their job is not just to sort of help and advise, it's also to network the small businesses to where they can get assistance with, hiring a person, accessing R&D tax credit information, getting a bookkeeper, applying for an Innovate UK grant, whatever it is. And finally, startups really like, they like short-term flexible deals, easy in, easy out, easy grow. These are more akin to licenses, typically. Leases, with legal obligations, deposits, dilapidations are things that are much more challenging for small businesses. So if you want to create a hub for enterprise, then these are the sorts of things you want. If you think about the network effects of value, I mean, we've all seen, one of your report points, Claire, that you make very clearly is, London's, central London has become, very expensive, and we're losing those places. So for me, the purpose of us all meeting today is how can we find this sort of economic proposition for there to be more of these hubs, in and around London and beyond. So my second point really is I believe these enterprise hubs, communities of small businesses actually can add value to a development. They're not a nice to have. They're not one floor of, a little bit of flexible office space. We've seen a lot of those around. I don't think they make an enormous difference to a development. You need a reasonable amount of scale, and then they make a significant difference to a development. From a placemaking point of view, where there is uplift in value for lots of organizations and lots of different, parts of that development, in a mixed use development, there's lots of different ways value can be realized through that placemaking role. I think the other thing about enterprise communities is the revenue situation and the valuation situation are pretty nearly the opposite of large commercial, tenants. We've lost 500,000 square feet of occupiers since the pandemic started, and we've gained 498,000. In other words, there's a vitality in the small business community that is just different. So you don't get the covenants, you don't get the long lease terms, but on the other hand, you get much more flexible turnover, much more responsiveness and agility. So actually, the operating revenue level, enterprise communities are actually really a pretty good deal. And we find that if you achieve scale, provide business support, create that kind of destination, you will end up earning premium rates from your highest payers. So in Andrew's model, the people who pay will actually find it's worth a premium to be in a building that's got that sense of community, that sense of business support. That premium is sufficiently economically valuable. It is worth the loss of the, some of the other benefits that come. So you're trading off the value generated by placemaking, the value generated by operating revenues, with what developers obviously feel, challenged by the loss of those long-term covenanted deals. Just moving on one more sort of step, we were selected to be the partner in a very large affordable workspace arrangement in pretty much in central London, very near a mainline train station. It is a new build. It is economically viable for us. It is economically viable for the occupants, and it has a tiered pricing system. And the reason is that it's very large scale. It's in a very economically vibrant part of London, which obviously means it's going to be much easier to fill it up. It will have a very large community, and it will have a very large placemaking impact, and it will include outreach activities into the local community, which it's actually interesting enough, it's in a very economically vibrant part of London, but it's very close to a pocket of real, deprivation and persistent non-engagement with the productive economy. And so this is kind of a Section 106 requirement, naturally enough, a sensible one, because it's one that will not only deliver the placemaking value and community inclusion value, but actually it's aligned with what the whole development, which will be delivering for large commercial tenants. We run another large affordable workspace building in an old refurbished factory in Belfast, which is very much the opposite. It's very much a regeneration centered operation. We are trying to draw entrepreneurship out of a part of Belfast that is not known for it. It is a big investment of time and energy in drawing enterprise out of West Belfast. It's just off the Shankill Road and the Falls Road. It's a different kind of challenge, but there the purpose is to be the copper sulfate crystal in the middle of an area, drawing together the sort of enterprise around it before building 2, 3, and 4 are built. So I hope I've given a slight sense of the fact that enterprise hubs, innovation hubs, call them sort of what you will, incubator communities, that these have certain characteristics that are needed, or else they don't work. They're a carbuncle on the side of something else. So they need a bit of scale in order to get that community. Secondly, they are adding value to developments. They make a difference and add value to the development. And thirdly, I'm just going to leave a thought behind, which is I think what we're looking for is probably a little bit different if you're looking at central London. The amount of sacrifice that is being made to have a small business, short, terms community, that the financial sacrifice is very considerable, so that the drivers of it will be very different from if you're in fringe London, where I think there is a challenge in creating enterprise communities. There is an enormous loss of office space, particularly for small businesses in the sort of greater London area. And lots of these sort of outer London fringes have lost enterprise communities. So fringe London will probably be different. And then not London and the Southeast is yet different again, where I think the challenge of trying to build affordable workspace as a means of creating economically significant clusters of businesses is yet a third purpose for them. I will stop there, Stephen, as I think filled my time.
David, I could give you another hour, I tell you, my friend. That was amazing. And I think that the way that you, first of all, identified what businesses wanted, the scale, the business support, the network, and the idea that community, bring people, community is a sellable asset. It's actually, people will pay a premium for the connection, both within a connection to their market, but also to their local community and the people who work there. And then your third point around the central issue cities, with the caveat that it's not just a London-centric debate today. And I love the fact that you shared this copper sulfate initiative in Belfast, an area that I know well. Well, look, we're coming to the end. There's a couple of questions that have come in on the chat. And if you haven't sent a question, please do. One question that came from somebody who I know is saying, what about small charities or social entrepreneurs who really see an opportunity here? It is very attractive for people who love curating social change and social impact. Lots of charities I know have also had their business model shattered. They had a gym or they had a place that people came, and because of face-to-face stuff, they're almost going out of business. Can I just ask all the panelists to say that, yes, of course, there's the issue of scale and professionalism and accountability and reputation, but we're not saying that this is just the proviso of those who are established. People like myself, a sole trader, started this work, social entrepreneur. What would you say to charities or people who haven't had experience in this retail sector or this building sector? How could we support them in seizing opportunities and developing affordable workspaces for their own communities. Maybe I'll ask Andrew to say something about that first. Andrew, any thoughts for somebody who is just coming to this new?
Sure. You mean in operating as an operator? Is that what you're asking, Steve? Yeah. So I think we'll try and help if we can, and just to put that point there. But I think as many have alluded to already, we are facing a situation where there's a lot of empty property out there, and there are, I've seen examples of both from the private sector and the public sector willing to entertain, particularly on smaller spaces and opportunities around meanwhile use. So I think it's about talking to them and particularly starting maybe with your local authority and the regeneration teams, and talking to them to see if there's any matchmaking potential and any properties available.
Great. Well, one of the actions from this call is that we could send this video and obviously the report to people like the NCVO and organisations who represent the charitable and the third sector, because there's some things that are really important to get right, but also we need people at the local who have a vision for changing and transforming their local areas. There's 3 pubs in my 1 mile radius here who've just gone to the wall, and meanwhile use is really attractive because it gives the owner some security that the place isn't going to become vandalised. So there's lots of opportunities there. Well, look, we've come to the end of our session. Isn't that great? We've kept to an hour, but I've got 5 minutes left, and I'm really going to ask now Claire, who is the author of this wonderful report, which I said earlier you're going to get in your mailboxes soon, to give a kind of final reflection. Claire, take 5 minutes if you can, just to sort of say, what would you say from both the questions that have come from participants today, but also from your report? What are the sort of final takeaways that you'd like to suggest we look at today?
Could you just put up my final slide, please? Thank you. Well, it's been fantastic hearing what everyone's got to say today, and it's been fantastic collaborating with you all over the last few weeks. I've learned so much, and I hope that I've done the sector justice in my report. But just a few sort of takeaways here for me. I put collaboration first because I think it's so important. Collaboration between, as I said, like local authorities, businesses, developers, and as you've all been talking about, the importance to just speak, to make it not a them and us, especially for areas, not just London, but picking somewhere like Peckham, for example, what they did at Peckham Levels, it was very, very much a consultation between local people. And it worked. It's worked amazingly well, and the social impact has been massive. Secondly, sustainability, both from a social sustainability side, again, and I think this runs through the whole thing. It's very much what David just picked up on it, the enterprise, bringing people together, the scale, learning from one another, the employment that comes from all of this, and, mixed use. I know Angela picked up on it very well. It really adds that placemaking, adding affordable workspace or affordable retail to a scheme adds that vibrancy, makes it so much more attractive, brings footfall to these schemes. And as we're just talking about, the meanwhile use, and as Stephen said, there's a number of pubs in our local area here, using these for purpose. So it brings up the area, and it also gives purpose, and it also gives people jobs. It enables people to use the space. But also, that came up in the chat earlier, hopefully meanwhile space we can lengthen that, and it can make people want to be in that area as well. Often meanwhile space can be used as checking out an area if it's going to work, and hopefully it will bring vibrancy, and it will make more affordable sort of workspaces pop up around that area. And I've just covered my final, and of course quality. I think yes. It's so important because the perception, of affordable workspace is very much, well, it's affordable, so it might be a little bit rubbish. Well, that's not true at all. Affordable workspace has quality. It has so much to offer, and I think we need to get away from that perception that it's poorer, it's second class, and it isn't. But I think, my one takeaway would be embrace it. It's not a problem, it's a solution to a number of problems. Looking at inequalities within the UK, this could be the way to really bring sort of equality to different areas. And I think, you know, just watch this space. I'm hoping to do much more on this. I'd love to work with you all more. I think there's so much more to go here, and I think post-pandemic we're going to see, you know, lots more happening in this area. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy the report, and any questions, do get back to me. Do pop me an email or give me a call. And you know, I loved talking about this. I've loved researching this, and you know, I hope to do more on the subject.
Great. Well, listen, Claire, a huge big clap. If we were in an auditorium, as I said, you'd often that keynote speech, you'd have a big clap. So we really applaud what you've done, and we thank also BCO, who have not sponsored the report, but have commissioned the report, and we'll put it on their website. Can I just make one last plea? When we talk about quality, we also talk about value. So, you know, the point that Andrew made, that people value the sense of community, the point that David said, that you can actually sell it as a premium. People are longing for belonging, to be corny, if you like. But there's an opportunity now post-pandemic to really be imaginative, and we're not the poor cousins of the sector. We really, I think, are at the heart of what we're developing, which will actually have real social impact. So without further ado, we have actually finished our time, bang on time, 12 o'clock on my phone. So we've gone for an hour. I'm going to ask that those of you who are on the list and on the email, if you want further suggestions of things that we could do again, we might be able to have another webinar like this. From my point of view, as a small operator here in South London at Hasham House, we're really keen for people to come and see what we're doing. We use this phrase, being a little bit of a magpie, come to steal the silver shiny bits. And that idea of sharing best practice, sharing ideas, sharing quality is something that I think we're all committed to. A huge thank you for David, for Daniel, for Andrew, and for Angela. We didn't hear from Nathan today. Nathan Lonside is doing something called Lab Collective. I'll put it in the app here. He's got a brilliant project in Old Street. So go and check that out as well, called the Lab Collective. You can see that. So that's goodbye from me and goodbye from all. And thank you so much for joining us.